So Parsha illuminated for Parsha's bow. So the Jewish people have been enslaved in Egypt now for close to 210 years, and this is the Parsha where we leave Egypt, and it culminates with the 10th plague, the 10th Makkah, Makas Bechoros, the plague of the firstborn, and that's where I want to begin in chapter 11. Verse 1, where Hashem says to Moshe, Vayomer Hashem el Moshe. If you have the source sheet, it's the first source. If you don't, it's okay. Vayomer Hashem el Moshe, Od nega echad avi al Paro ve'al Mitzrayim. We're going to bring one more plague on Pharaoh and on Egypt. Acharichin yishalach eschem mizeh. After this, he will send you mizeh, from here. Kishalcho, when he sends you, kala. That's a word that is going to need to be interpreted. Kala, completely, like the word kol, in all. It will be complete. Garesh yigaresh eschem mizeh. He will drive you out completely. And then, kind of an interjection, God says to Moshe, Daber na baznei ha'am, speak please in the ears of the nation, v'yishalu ish me'esre'ehu, and they should ask, each man from his friend, or borrow, let them borrow, she'ela in Hebrew also means to borrow, let them borrow from their friends, v'isha me'esrusa, so each man from his friend, each woman from her friend, klei chesef v'klei zahav, vessels of silver and vessels of gold. Vayiteng Hashem eschengam b'nei Mitzrayim, and God gave the people favor in the Egyptians' eyes. Gam ha'ish Moshe gadol me'od me'eretz Mitzrayim, and Moshe was highly esteemed in the land of Mitzrayim, in the land of Egypt. B'nei avdei Pharaoh, b'nei am, in the eyes of the servants of Pharaoh, in the eyes of the nation. And then Moshe says, Ko amar Hashem, kachatzos halayla, around midnight, Ani yotzei betoch Mitzrayim, I will go out in Egypt, and the plague of the firstborn will ensue. So God says to Moshe to start telling, actually he just tells him that he's going to bring one more plague, and quickly, seemingly, go speak to the nation, speak to the people of Israel, and tell them the yishalu, they should again either ask or borrow vessels, things from the Egyptians, or actually, if we are very specific, it doesn't say here from the Egyptians, it just says from his friend, and each woman from her friend, and then God placed the favor of the Jewish people in the eyes of the Egyptians, etc., etc. So I want to take this step by step and try to understand what's going on here, beginning with the first verse, the first pasuk, and specifically the end of the verse where it says, Kishalcho kala gareshi garesh eschem mizeh. Here the translation is, when he lets you out, he will completely drive you out of here. But what does this mean completely? What is the word kala? So Rashi, in his commentary, and many of the early commentators also, like Rashi, say that kala comes, again, like the word completely or in full, which Rashi says means kulchem yishalach. He's going to send all of you out. Up till now, there's been a lot of back and forth between Moshe and Pharaoh, who's allowed to go out. At first it was like, just the men and the women, the adults, the kids. Who's going to be allowed to go out? And now finally, God says that Pharaoh. God says to Moshe, Paro will kala. He'll send you all out. Now you're all going out. And indeed, when the plague takes place and Paro comes to Moshe and he says it should be kedaberchem, it should be like you said, and the Rashi there too says, what does it mean like you said? Like you demand, like you said that all of you should go out. Right? So all of you are going to go out. Now, when we read this verse and he says that all of you are going to go out, for how long are they supposed to go out now? Is he completely releasing them? Or is he saying you can all go out for a little vacation, for a vacay, for a few days? Because if we remember, that's actually all that Moshe has been asking Paro for up till now. And we'll go back and we'll look at those verses in a moment. But the original ask was not to let the Jewish people go completely free, but rather let us out for 3 days so we can serve our God, do some kind of service to God, and then we'll come back. That was the original claim, the original ask that Moshe made of Paro. So according to this reading, Kala does not indicate that they're being completely set free. It's just that everybody's allowed to go, but it still could be for that temporary 3-day vacation that they had requested. The other way to read the pasuk, which is how numerous commentators do it. Interestingly, it's more like the later commentaries, Rav Hirsch and the Netziv, Rav Naftali Tzvi Berlin, and we're going to discuss this is how Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky also read it, that kala means in this case completely. I'm setting you free completely. That this is the end. Go free and don't come back. And that's the other way we can understand this word kala. So Rashi says kala means that it means everybody. It should be it's complete in that it's everybody's going out, but not necessarily it's a complete freedom, but just for a few days. While others understand that it means I'm going to completely free you. Now we'll see as we go that the way that Rashi interprets other parts of the Torah here surrounding this, it's clear that he could not have understood that Paro is freeing them completely, because that would contradict other things that Rashi says. So let's go through a little bit of the lead up to this and really what happens after this, and try to get a sense of what this potential 3-day journey or ask was about. Why were they asking for 3 days, and what did Paro actually agree to? And I think we're going to learn some very, very fascinating perspectives. So if we go back to Shemos chapter 3, Parak Gimel, which is where God where Moshe encounters God at the burning bush. So there, Hashem, God, assigns Moshe his task to bring the people out, and he tells him, if you look in the sources, it's the second box, Vishamu lekolecha, they'll listen to your voice, Uvasa, and you'll come, Atav Ziknei Israel, you and the elders of Israel, El Melech Mitzrayim, to the king of Egypt, V'amartem elav, and you'll say to him, Hashem Elkei Yivrim Nikra Aleinu, God, the God of the Hebrews has appeared to us, V'ata, and now Nilchana Derech Shloshes Yamim Bamidbar. Let us please go for 3 days into the desert, V'nizbecha Hashem Elkeinu, and we will offer sacrifices to Hashem our God. And it continues, and God tells Moshe, again, this is at the original meeting, I know that he's not going to let you out. Here they translate, except through a mighty hand. He's not going to let you out initially. And I will send forth my hand, and I will strike him, and then he will send you out. And then again over there it says, in verse 21, and I will place the favor of the nation in the eyes of Egypt. And when you go out, you won't go empty-handed. And the top of the second page is the source sheet. And each woman will borrow from her neighbor, or ask, again, that same word, v'sha'ala, she'll ask or she'll borrow from her neighbor, from the dweller in her house, klei chesef v'klei zahav, silver vessels, gold vessels, and here it says smalos, also clothes, and you'll place them on your children, and you empty out Egypt. So again, we have this original the original instruction that you're going to ultimately ask or borrow items from the Egyptians and take them out, which again, that also, like, what's going on with that? Why, if it means to borrow, why are they borrowing? So it's consistent. If they're borrowing, it's consistent with the idea they're only going for 3 days. We're going for 3 days. We need some things that for our sacrifices we're going to offer. So we need to borrow them, and we'll be back, and we'll return them when we get back. That fits in very, very nicely. So definitely, originally they were asking for just 3 days. Now what happens? If you look in the second box on page 2, chapter 5, this is also from Parsha Shmos, the end of Parsha Shmos. It says, "V'achar bo Moshe v'Aaron." So then Moshe and Aaron came. They came to Paro. V'amru Paro, Kamar Hashem Elokei Yisrael. So says Hashem, the God of Israel, Shalach es ami, send forth my nation v'yochogu li b'midbar, and let them sacrifice to me in the desert. Vayomer Paro, and Paro said, Mi Hashem asher eshma b'kolo, who is this Hashem that I should listen to him? I'm not sending them. And they say in verse 3, they clarify, Vayomru Elokei Yivrim Nikra Aleinu, the God of the Hebrews appeared to us, and he said, Nelcha na derech shoshes yamim b'midbar, please go for 3 days in the desert, v'nizbecha l'Hashem Elokeinu, and let us offer sacrifices. And what does Paro say? What are you doing? Last verse 4. Vayomer alei melech Mitzrayim, lama Moshe v'Aaron tafriyu asal mima'asav, l'chus l'si v'lo seichem. Why are you disturbing the people from their work? You're giving them hope that they're going to go out. Go back to your own labors. Leave the people alone. And after that, actually, the end of Parsha Shmos, Paro makes the work much harder. He no longer provides materials, and the people are completely afflicted and broken, and so much so that Moshe, at the very end of Parsha Shmos, says to God, Lama hareosa lama, why have you done bad against this nation? God, what are you doing? You sent me to Paro, and look, it just made things worse. So the original instruction was to tell Paro we're going out for 3 days, and that's what they asked, and Paro said no. And then each time, actually, if you follow the plagues where Moshe keeps coming back to Paro, and he says, let us go serve our God. And Paro either says no, or sometimes he agrees, go serve your God, and then he changes his mind. But either way, it's all like, go serve your God. It seems that the plan hasn't changed. It's go serve your God for 3 days, and then come back. And that's really what Moshe has been asking for all along. And we have no indication that that changed. Now, in fact, after Paro sends them out, the beginning of next week's Parsha, right? So what happens? So he sends, the people are leaving. And if you look in the next source, chapter 14, verse 5, Vayugad el melech Mitzrayim ki barach ha'am. It was reported to Paro that the people had fled. Vayafech levav Paro v'avodav el ha'am. And Paro and his servants had a change of heart toward the people. Vayomru, and they said, Mazos asinu, what have we done? Ki shilachnas Yisrael me'avdenu, that we've sent them forth from serving us. Says Rashi over there, Iktorin shalachimam, he sent officers with them. Paro didn't just send the Jews out. He sent them with an escort, because he was sending them for 3 days. He wanted to make sure that they did what they claimed they were going to do, and then they came back. And as soon as the 3 days had set, once 3 days had passed, that they had set that they would go for and return, and he saw that they weren't coming back. So then these officers, these spies, basically the scouts, came back and said, Paro, they're not coming back. And then Paro went and chased after them and ended up drowning in the Yam Suf with the splitting of the sea. So it's very clear the way Rashi explains this verse in next week's Parsha, that Paro was only sending them out. Even when he sent them out, he was only sending them out for 3 days. And he was expecting them to come back. And that's why he sent scouts. And when the scouts said they're not coming back, so then he chased after them. So if we go back to the verse that we started with, this word kala, right? That kishalcho kala, he's sending them out completely. So we understand that Rashi doesn't read it to mean he's sending them out completely to be completely free, because we see that's clearly not how Rashi understood the series of events. Paro was only sending them out for 3 days. So what does kala mean? It means in full. He was sending everybody out. Everybody that Moshe asked for can go for the 3 days, but not that they were being sent out permanently. Well, as I mentioned, others read that no, kala means at this point Paro said, "That's it, you can go," and he set them completely free. And then he said, "What have I done that I set them free? Let's go chase after them and bring them back." So what I want to try to understand is what's going on here. Why is the original request specifically for 3 days? Let's put it another way. This is how the Ran, Rabbeinu Nissim, poses the question or sets up the question. We know that after the Jewish people witnessed the miracle of the splitting of the sea in next week's Parsha, it says, "Vayaminu b'Hashem u'v'Moshe avdo." They now believed in God, had faith in God and in Moshe. What, up till now they didn't believe in God? What happened to were the 10 plagues not good enough? They had to see the splitting of the sea to build their trust in God. So the Ran says that the problem was that although they saw these great miracles of the plagues, but there were conflicting events that challenged their belief. And one of those conflicting ideas or events that was going on was they were aware, apparently, that they were only asking to leave for 3 days. So they said, what's going on? We have Moshe is claiming to be the representative of this great God and who can do anything and bring these makos, bring these plagues, and he does. But if he's really representing this great God, then why does he only ask for a 3-day break from this slavery? That's not what you would expect from the God of the universe against a lowly human like Paro. So in a certain sense, their faith was challenged. And really that question should be our question. Why was Moshe only asking for a 3-day break? Why was God telling Moshe to ask for just a 3-day sojourn in the desert, a 3-day vacation, and then they would come back? And especially if that's not what they were planning. Did he had to did they have to sneak out of Egypt? The God of the universe, the Almighty, couldn't get them out in the open and say, "That's it, Paro. This is it. We're going and we're not coming back." Why does God have to trick Paro into thinking that they're just going for 3 days and why does he not just, he already was bringing all these plagues. Why not just say, "That's it, we're out of here and we're not coming back"? So, additionally, the Ran asks, and it's a related question, is why are the people asking to borrow the items of the Egyptians and tricking them? And it's true they certainly owed them for hundreds of years of slavery, of unpaid labor. The Gemara says that they owed them, but why do it this way? Why so demand payment, but why trick them? Why say, can we borrow your stuff, and then say, haha, we're not coming back, right? Why do it in this manner? Especially, we see again, God is showing off his might. So just say, pay us. You owe us, pay us. So the Ran says that this was all God's plan in order to take revenge against Paro and the Egyptians at the sea. This was all a setup, perhaps because of Midah Keneged Midah, measure for measure, that the Egyptians had to drown the Jewish boys in the sea, in the river. So their punishment was to be drowned in the sea, but specifically in a way that they brought it upon themselves. God wanted to arrange things that they would come and they would chase after the Jewish people, and they would walk right into the dry land of the splitting of the sea and have the waves come crashing down upon themselves. And had Moshe said from the start, we're leaving and we're not coming back, and brought all these plagues and just totally blasted Paro and the Egyptians away, not literally, but in a way that they couldn't say no. So then Paro would have never given chase. He would have, if he set them free, you guys are, there's nothing I could do. I can't stop you. Go free. So he never would have given chase if he had really set them free. But God wanted him specifically to give chase, and God wanted to punish him measure for measure. And so the whole thing was done in such a way that Paro would think he was only freeing them for a short time, and then when he saw that they weren't listening and they weren't coming back, then he would say, they're breaking the deal, I'm going to give chase, and he would drive himself right into the Yam Suf, into the sea, and it would come crashing down. And that's also why they had to, that's also why they specifically were borrowing the items from the Egyptians. This was all part of the deception. And it could be, says the Ran, that, and it seems that certainly the Jewish people didn't even know that this was just a deception. That's why their faith was not so steady yet, because they also were wondering, what's going on? Why are we borrowing? Why are we only going for 3 days? And it could be even Moshe didn't realize that this is going to be permanent, because this is what God told Moshe. Only God knew what was going on. And so part of the subterfuge that God was pulling to engineer events that Paro and the Egyptians would walk into the sea, would chase them and walk into the sea, part of that was that they would only borrow the vessels because they were going for a short time, and they would be back, and yeah, so all of this was in order to really carry out the measure for measure against the Egyptians, to get Paro to chase after the Jewish people. And according to this, it never was really the plan that they would only leave for 3 days. That was never God's intent, but only God knew that, it seems. Not even Moshe knew that. And that's what we see, is that throughout, it's always, we're going for 3 days, we're going for a short time, and then we'll come back, and even till the last minute, till Paro realizes that they're not coming back. That's why he gives chase, and he ends up being punished measure for measure. That's how the Ran Rabbeinu Nisim explains this. Okay, but I want to share kind of another perspective, which is very fascinating, and answers a lot of questions in a different way, and that is from Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky. And he says, I don't understand. Fine, he doesn't quote the Ran, but let's accept the Ran's explanation. But still, so now we're saying God is the one who's tricking. God was tricking Paro the whole time. Is that, God whose trait, whose midah is emes, is the trait of truth? It's still a little bit difficult to swallow that the whole thing was one big trick against Paro. And Moshe he's Ne'eman. The Torah says he's b'chol beisi Ne'eman. He's the most trusted person. So he's only trusted in what he tells us, but he's not trusting in when he tells Paro. He wasn't telling the truth. Again, he might have thought that he was telling the truth, but the whole thing, to say that the whole thing was a trick, it's difficult to wrap our minds around that, and especially Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky, who was known for his tremendous integrity. So, so Rabbi Yaakov suggests like this, that let's go back a second to what happened when Moshe first goes to Paro. And he says, Paro, God came to me. He said, go out. He said, you should let us go for 3 days. And Paro says, who's this God? Paro says, why are you disturbing the people from their labor, from their work? And then he intensifies the work. And Moshe does not understand what God is doing. And he says to God, Lama hareyosa, why have you done evil to the people? Why have you made it worse for them? And it's a good question. And we see challenges in life and we don't understand. And sometimes we want to ask that question. Lama hareyosa, God, why have you done this? But we know there's an answer. And we don't always learn the answer. We don't always know what it is, but we know there's an answer. In this case, the answer was as follows. The reason why their work, their labor had to intensify, their pain and suffering had to intensify, was because really, what was the decree that God had told Abraham would occur? And again, why the whole thing had to occur is its own topic. But what was the promise to Abraham? It was, your children, your descendants will be strangers in a foreign land. Va'avadim v'nuosam, they'll work them and afflict them for how long? Arba meos shana, 400 years. Now, were they slaves for 400 years? They were not slaves for 400 years. They were slaves for 210 years. So we say, well, the 400 years started from when Yitzchak was born. Okay, but that's not what it says. It doesn't say that to start counting from when Isaac was born. What does that have to do? Okay, so there must be explanations for why we can count from then. But it's definitely not the simple meaning of the promise that God gave to Avram. The promise was, you're going to be slaves for 400 years. So what happened? In fact, the Midrash implies that the plan changed. Look at the last source I put on the page. It's a Midrash in Shir Hashirim. So Shir Hashirim, the verse says, Kol dodei hinei ba. The sound of my beloved, behold, he approaches. Medaleg al harim, mikapetz al agvos. He leaps over the mountains and bounds over the hills. Says the Midrash. Rabbi Yehuda of Rabbi Menachem Yerabban. Okay, so we're going to talk about Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda Omer. Rabbi Yehuda says, Kol dodi hinei ba. The sound of my beloved comes. What is that referring to? This is a verse in Shir Hashirim, and it's the Song of Songs. Zeh Moshe. It refers to Moshe. Bisha sheba ve'amar li Yisrael. When Moshe came and said to the Jewish people, B'chodesh zatem nigalim, you're going to be redeemed in this month. Amrlo. They said, Moshe Rabbeinu, heich anu nigalim. How could we be redeemed now? V'alo amar HaKadosh Baruch Hu Avram, didn't God say to Avraham, V'avadim osam arba meo shana, that you're going to be slaves for 400 years? V'adaying ein biyadeinu ela masayim v'eser shana, and we are only at 210 years. So how could we go free? That's what they asked. It's a good question. Amar lahem, so Moshe said, Hoel v'hu chafetz b'gulaschem, since he desires your redemption, God desires to redeem you. Eino mabit b'cheshbonosechem. He's not looking at the calculation. Ela midaleg al heharim. He's skipping over the mountains. What does that mean? He's skipping over the mountains? Says the Midrash. That's the verse in Shir Hashirim. He's medaleg al harim. He skips over the mountains. En harim ugvos hamurin kang ela kitzim v'yiburin. It's the here they translate the terminuses and intercalations. Basically, it's the calculations. He's skipping over the calculations. Okay, that's the interpretation of the Midrash. But the point is originally that there's some kind of skipping over the calculations that's going on. It's not the real calculation. He's playing with it, right? We say in the Haggadah that God was chishav es haketz. He calculated the kates. The kates means the end. So many point out that the gematria of the word kates is 190. That he took off, he recalculated to avoid 190 years out of the 400, right? 210 plus 190 is 400. So somehow he got rid of 190 years of slavery by calculating it from when Yitzchak was born. But why did he do that? They were supposed to be slaves for 400 years. So the problem was that we had become so immersed in Egyptian society that we would have lost our identity if we stayed longer. This is what many of the commentaries explain. This is what Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky quotes, that God had to take us out then. The way that some say it is, the promise was to the descendants of Abraham, right? That's who God promised would be taken out. But if we would cut off our connection to Abraham by just forgetting everything, our entire tradition from the forefathers, and becoming just totally assimilated into Egyptian society, even as slaves, but just if we had completely lost our connection, then the promise wouldn't have applied to us anymore. So we couldn't wait to go out. And so God had to speed it up. So he redid the calculation, so to speak. Now, but how can you just give up 190 years of slavery? So the answer is that the slavery intensified. So that in those last, really it was like 6 months, from when Paro intensified the slavery and said, you have to get all the materials and everything. It was so intense that it would make up in a certain way, not completely, but in a certain way, for the 190 years that it would still have to be repaid in a certain way. But in a certain way, it would make up for that and allow them to go out now. So that's why, Lama Hariosim, why did you do evil? Moshe asked God. Why did you do bad to them? We don't like, what's going on? Says Rabbi Yaakov, the answer is that this was going to speed up the Exodus. This was going to bring, because it needed to happen ASAP. And this was going to speed it up. Yeah, you want to ask something? Yeah.
No, thank you, Rabbi. I was smiling because I was typing. We know that God's word never go unfulfilled. So where will those years be, and then you answer it. We know it's going to be taken care of some way or somehow. So
Right.
that was the question I was typing.
Good.
Thank you.
So now, so says Rabbi Yaakov, what really was the plan, once God saw they're not going to last, I have to get them out now. But he didn't have to get them out. I guess there was, I think I skipped a step. Let's go back a step. I already explained why he intensified the labor. But even before that, that wasn't the original plan. The original plan was God saw the Jewish people weren't going to last. They were becoming so involved in Egyptian society, losing their connection to their forefathers. You know what they needed? They needed a retreat. They needed a Shabbaton. They needed a 3-day inspirational journey into the desert, bring sacrifices, reconnect, get inspired, build up their emunah again, and then they could go back for 190 more years, hopefully, and that was the original plan. And so when God goes to Moshe and he says, go to Paro and tell Paro that we need 3 days. We need 3 days to get inspired, to work on our faith, to work on our emunah. And he really meant it. He really meant it was going to be for just 3 days. It wasn't a lie. It wasn't a trick. It wasn't. It was exactly what he meant. But what did Paro say? Paro said no. So then we're stuck. Paro saying no, then we need to go to Plan C, I guess. Plan C is we're going to take you out completely. Plan C is we're going to speed up the 400 years with intense labor for the last 6 months, and then we're going to get you out permanently. And that's what it means. Actually, if you look on the first page So in the second box, chapter 3, verse 19, God says, I know that the king of Egypt will not permit you to go except through a mighty hand. So he's not going to let you go for the short journey. Then I will stretch forth my hand and smite the Egyptians with all my miracles, and afterwards he will send you out, and it will be permanent. That's what Moshe, Hashem says to Moshe is going to happen. So really what you need is a retreat for 3 days. Go tell Paro, let you out for 3 days. Everybody will get inspired. You'll be able to come back and make it through the rest of the time in Egypt. But Paro is not going to agree to that. And I'm going to have to smite him, and then he's going to send you out completely. And that brings us back to the verse we started with. So, Kishalcho kala garesh garesh eschem mizeh. When he sends you out, God says to Moshe, now, as we stand on the precipice of the plague of the firstborn, of the Exodus, he's going to send you out completely, meaning completely and permanently. And then in Parshas Beshalach, after he does so, next week's Parsha, and he says, what have I done? He says, what have I done? Which the first sentence in the very first pasuk on the sheet, he says, Kishalcho kala gareshi garesh eschem mizeh. When he sends you out, kala. So kala, we're saying it can mean either everybody, but just for 3 days, or it can mean completely, sending you forth completely. And then in next week's parsha, he says, what have I done? And he regrets it. Okay, so that's the approach of Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky. Originally, we were supposed to be there for 400 years. God saw that we were getting lost in Egyptian society. We were losing our connection to our forefathers. He said they need a break. They need a retreat. They need an inspirational 3-day Shabbat retreat or Shabbaton. And that's what he sent Moshe originally to ask for. But Paro said no. So then the backup plan is we're going to speed up the 400 years, intensify the pain and suffering, so it equals out to the 190 years that we're missing, and then he will send you out completely. Okay. Now let's go back and talk a bit about this instruction, though, to Yishalu. It's back to chapter 11, verse 2 now, the second verse on the source sheets. Daber nabaz ne'am, speak please in the ears of the nation, the Yishalu ish me'esru ehu v'isha me'esru rusak le'chesef le'zahav. And they should ask, or borrow, again, I'm going back and forth between ask and borrow, from their friend, vessels of silver and vessels of gold. So what does V'yishalu mean? So the Ran, like we said before, understood it to mean borrow, and many understand it to mean borrow. Others say, no, it doesn't mean borrow. It means ask for a gift. The word Yishalu means to ask. Ask them for a gift. And it should be permanent. You should ask them to give you a gift. Now, why is it calling them Re'ehu and Re'usa, your friends? If it's referring to the Egyptians, why is it calling them? It should say, you should ask the Egyptians. They're not their friends. These are the people that have been enslaving them for 210 years. So why does it say you should ask your friends? So there's different answers offered. The Midrash says, interestingly, that now they were their friends. After all the Egyptians had been through and suffered, and if all of a sudden they wanted to be friends with the Jews, they wanted to be their friends, they wanted to give to them because they were in a way punished. They were scared of them, or as actually the pasuk says, the verse says the Jews found favor in their eyes, and Moshe found favor in their eyes. So now they weren't our friends, but we were their friends, so to speak. That's what the Midrash suggests. But the Malbim has a very interesting read of this. And the Malbim says that it didn't mean to ask the Egyptians. It meant go around asking your friends, the other Jews, to borrow their vessels, because then the Egyptians will see that we need vessels. We need these vessels, and if they would see that we would need the vessels, so then they would at this point offer them to us as well. So that was the intent, that we wouldn't ask them for them, we would ask each other for them, but they would offer them to us. Meaning originally, if you look at chapter 3, verse 22, so it's the top of the second page, it says that each woman shall borrow from her neighbor and the dweller in her house silver and gold objects and garments. So over there, that was originally the plan, was they were going to borrow them from their neighbors, and it would be like an exchange, because they were going to go out for 3 days, we were going to go out for 3 days, and we would borrow their stuff, and they would have our stuff as kind of collateral, because it's our neighbors, and that would be the deal. But later they were to ask their friends, they were to ask ask the other Jews, and then the Egyptians would see this, and they would themselves offer them for free. Again, don't have time to go through the whole Malbim, but he basically builds up this idea that the original even though they were originally planning to lend it, but that originally they thought they were sending them out for 3 days, but then as they were sending them out, they changed their mind. The Egyptians, when they actually kicked the Jews out, they were kicking them out permanently. They knew, not Paro. Paro was only planning for 3 days, but the Egyptians themselves, when they sent the Jews out, they were sending them out permanently. Once they knew they were sending them out permanently, they were mochel, they forgave the items. And originally they were planning to get them back, but once they said, go and don't come back, they were basically saying, and keep whatever we gave you. So that was all part of the plan. Okay, leaving that aside, let's just finish with one thought, which is the thought of Rav Hirsch. And Rav Hirsch understands that the intent here was kala, that they were being like Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky, they were going to be completely sent out with no intent of having them back. And Yishalu was not to borrow but to ask. You should ask for the gifts, ask for these items from the Egyptians, and not to borrow but to as permanently. Now Rav Hirsch says that God has to say, Daber na, please go and ask them. Why please? Why would we hold back? Why would we be reluctant to ask the Egyptians for these vessels? And the answer is that, says Rav Hirsch, we just had the plague of darkness right before this, also in this week's Parsha. And in the plague of darkness, the Egyptians were completely blinded. They were stuck. They couldn't move. We had the opportunity to walk into their houses. The Jewish people could have taken whatever they wanted from them. But they didn't. And instead, they proved what he calls, again, at least in the translation, their sterling moral quality in the most brilliant manner. For 3 days, their oppressors, chained in blindness, were completely helpless. And all their treasures lay open in their houses, and no Jew took the opportunity to take the slightest advantage against their persons or possessions. So at the moment when they recovered the use of their eyesight, the Egyptians, and found all their possessions untouched, God made this recognition of the moral nobility of the Jews at last overcome the Egyptians' antipathy to the Jews. when they saw all this stuff was in the open, and the Jews did not take anything. They didn't touch them. They didn't take their things. They were inspired. They were overcome by the Kiddush Hashem, and of the, they were impressed with Moshe as well, and that was what impressed them. And although it was against the grain now to ask the Egyptians for anything, but and to lose that kind of moral victory, so we don't want it, we don't need anything from you, we're not taking anything, we're not asking. But God wanted that the people should not go out in poverty. That that the foundation of that we should begin with prosperity, but that it should come specifically, it should be acquired through the recognition of their moral greatness. It was because the Egyptians saw the moral quality of the Jews in that they didn't touch anything, they didn't take anything. That's what encouraged them to give. And that should be the formation of the prosperity of the Jewish people. It should come from as a reward, or out of recognition of the what he calls again the moral greatness, the moral quality of the Jewish people that they exhibited in the plague of darkness by not taking anything. And that's, at this time, again, God has a promise to Avram that the Jewish people will go out with great wealth, that that will be the beginning of their nation. But it's going to happen, says Rav Hirsch, it does happen in a way where the Egyptians are happy to give to them because they're so impressed with their moral standard and how they didn't take anything from them during the plague of darkness. And that, I think, is something important to all the plagues and all of that, that the fear, that's not what encouraged them to want to give their things to the Jewish people, but rather the upstanding moral quality of the Jewish people. And ultimately that's what that's what makes a Kiddush Hashem. That's what sanctifies God's name in the world, is when we live to a higher standard than what people expect. And yeah, okay. So just to, well, over time, but to just summarize some of the thoughts we shared. So we talked about how there are kind of two approaches to what the 3 days were about. According to the Ran, it was all to get Paro to chase after the Jews. It was all to get him to suffer, him and the Egyptians, mida k'neged mida, measure for measure, by drowning in the sea. And that's why they wanted to borrow the items also. That was keeping with that subterfuge. Perhaps nobody knew about it except God. And we had that Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky, that the 3 days, the purpose was because we were so entrenched in Egyptian society that the only way to dig ourselves out would be a 3-day retreat. Paro said no to that. So then, in order to speed up the exile, speed up the slavery, it had to intensify. But then we were able to go out earlier. And when we were sent out completely. It was no longer intended to be just for 3 days. And we talked at the end about the borrowing of the vessels, and the main idea at the end of Rav Hirsch, that who says it wasn't borrowing, it was asking for them, but that the Egyptians were ready to hand them over willingly because they were so impressed with the sterling moral quality of the Jewish people exhibited during the plague of darkness, where we didn't take anything of theirs or touch them, despite their inability to stop us. Okay.
Yashar Koach, Rabbi. Very interesting.
Thank you.
Oh, very, very.